Yes, we are back, and we are black here on WLTH 1370M. That is 92.7 AM. And if you're nasty, and as you heard there, we are talking about the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. This week, 105 years ago, in black history. Let's do it.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet?
Beautiful. Proud. I must be respected. I must be protected. I am somebody.
Yes. This week in black history, 105 years ago, exactly, we had the Black Wall Street Tulsa Massacre. One of the deadliest episodes of racial violence in American history, and that's saying a lot. The United States was pretty much built on racial violence. That's pretty much the entire first 200, 300 years of this country's history. It took place between May 31st and June 1st, 1921, in the Greenwood district of Tulsa, a prosperous black community known as Black Wall Street. Now, there's a lot of discrepancies on what supposedly caused it. Now, the immediate trigger supposedly was an incident involving a 19-year-old black shoeshiner named Dick Rowland and a 17-year-old white elevator operator named Sarah Page. The exact details aren't, exactly clear, very fuzzy, but we do know Rowland entered the elevator in a downtown building and Page screamed. Some accounts suggest he may have stumbled and grabbed her arm to keep his balance. There was no evidence of sexual assault that was ever produced. And Page didn't even, press charges. It's important to put that into the story, to include that the woman supposedly that they were doing all this for never pressed any charges, never testified that he did anything to her. It was just assumed that he did something to her. She might have just been racist and scared by a black man. However, local newspapers sensationalized the incident and rumors spread that Rowland had attacked Sarah Page. Now, this was just 2 years after the Red Summer of 1919. We've actually talked about that here on the show. The Red Summer of 1919 was one of the deadliest summers in American history, where you had situations like Elaine, Arkansas, where the entire black community was basically burned to the ground and killed off by racist whites, the Ku Klux Klan and White Citizens Council and those types of people. They killed a lot of black people in that black community, and you all over America. I think in Chicago you saw something as well. Let me see, where else was it? You had Chicago also, and Washington D.C. as well. In 1919 you saw massacres. So this was only 2 years after that. So they were regularly wiping black communities off the earth, whether they were successful or not. So local newspapers sensationalized the incident, and rumors spread that Rowland had attacked her at this time of intense racial tensions across America. There were lynchings, there was segregation. We were in the height of Jim Crow and the black codes, and violence during an era known as the Red Summer that we just talked about. So the situation escalated very quickly. A white mob actually gathered outside of the courthouse where Rowland was being held on May 31st, 1921. A group of black Greenwood residents, many of them who were military veterans who had just served in World War I, went to the courthouse to help protect him from being lynched. After a confrontation between armed black and white citizens, a shot was fired. Now, there is no way to definitively say who shot first. Historians are still debating who shot first. The crowd at this point erupts into violence. On June 1st, 1921, white mobs, a lot who had been deputized and armed by the local police. That's how, entrenched racism was into the fabric of our communities, and still is. There's been situations like in LA, Los Angeles, the most liberal city, supposedly one of the most liberal cities in the world. Just a few years ago, they had a scandal where they found that they had literal white supremacist gangs that had like the tattoos and, different, initiation rituals and everything in LA, Los Angeles. So just imagine 1921 Oklahoma, how racist their police was. They were literally armed and deputized by the police. And they invaded Greenwood, the black community in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Over the next several hours, they looted all the homes. They burned all the homes. They burned buildings, businesses, churches, schools, medical office, all destroyed, all wiped off the earth. Residents were shot, beaten, or forced to flee. Thousands of black residents were detained in an internment-style camp. They were literally holding black people in an internment camp after invading their community. Witnesses reported airplanes being used for surveillance and possibly to drop incendiary devices. There were bombs allegedly dropped on Black Wall Street. By the end of it, roughly 35 city blocks of Greenwood had been destroyed. 35 blocks. More than 1,200 homes were destroyed. Thousands of residents were left homeless. Now, how many people were killed exactly? That also is up for debate. Obviously, these things happened a long time ago, 105 years ago. The official historical death count at the time was considered 36, which sounds, come on, 36. That's ridiculously low. Modern historic research suggests that the true number was much higher. Some estimates range between 75 and 300 deaths. Most historians believe that the actual toll was probably closer to the upper end, closer to 300 than to 75, Investigations have continued into possible mass graves around Tulsa. Mass graves. Now, what was Black Wall Street exactly? It was one of the most prosperous black communities in America. It contained banks, hotels, restaurants, grocery stores, professional offices, newspapers, and theaters. Think about this. In 1921, we don't have theaters in Gary. No. We don't have a theater in Gary now. Think about that. And they had one in Black Wall Street in 1921. Because segregation prevented black residents from spending money in white-owned establishments, Greenwood developed a strong, self-sustaining economy. The destruction completely wiped out generations of accumulated wealth. And this is what we talk about. A lot of us who are pro-reparations and a part of the reparations movement, we talk about this all the time. We don't have generational wealth. Not just because we were slaves. Yeah, that was a part of it. But if we had been left alone, say during Reconstruction, and allowed to accumulate wealth in those years after slavery, we would still be much better off than we are today, economically. The problem is that America did not leave us alone. as black people during Reconstruction. And, you know, ultimately there was the Compromise of 1877, where the Democrats and the Republicans both got together and decided to allow the Confederates to retake the South and to completely turn their heads while black people were run out of all institutions of power and wealth. That's how you end up with the black codes. That's how you end up with Jim Crow, is the Compromise of 1877. A lot of people don't like talking about that, especially Republicans. Republicans love to tell this story about, well, Republicans are the ones who ended slavery and the Democrats were the party of slavery. Okay, and y'all also both agreed on the Compromise of 1877 to let the Confederates take over the South and continue to terrorize black people for another 100 years. So you know better than they are. So now we do not have the type of accumulated wealth, the generational wealth, that we would have even if we had been allowed to continue being the thousands of black politicians and businesses all over the South that you saw in the era after slavery ended, when you saw Reconstruction. And even in situations like this, even where you have segregation, black people were building our own self-sustaining communities, even within the Jim Crow, even within a segregated society, and still that gets wiped out by racial terrorism. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about reparations, folks. We spent decades building black institutions like Black Wall Street, and in a lot of these cities around the country, like Rosewood, and again, you had it built to the ground. 90% of black farmland was taken from black people in the 20th century. Not during slavery, during the 20th century. The century I was born, the century most of you were born who are listening to this. 90%. So between racial terrorism, racistly applied eminent domain laws, and out-and-out sabotage from people like the FBI, who assassinated our civil rights leaders, destroyed our civil rights organizations, our government, who created redlining with the banks and these institutions. This is why we don't have generational wealth. Don't let them gaslight you into believing that the reason that we don't have, intergenerational wealth is because of our own personal life choices, which is what people like Elon Musk and other white supremacist racists perpetuate, and even a lot of black people who like to push this narrative of, pull yourself up by your bootstraps type capitalism. That's not the case. Black people pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps many a times. It happened. Black Wall Street happened. Rosewood happened. Elaine, Arkansas happened. Galveston, Wilmington, 1898, that all happened. Atlanta, 1906, that happened. We were pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, and have many times pulled ourselves. We were doing that during the civil rights movement. What happened to Martin Luther King? Where is he? Where is Medgar? What happened to the Black Panthers who invented school breakfast programs? That wasn't us pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. Of course it was. And Black Wall Street, what we're seeing is a reminder of what happens when black people do pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. The destruction wiped out generations of accumulated wealth. Generations of accumulated wealth. Over $60 billion in today's money we've lost by not having something like Black Wall Street. But they want to lecture you about your personal life choices. That's why it's important to learn this history. That's why I do this segment, This Week in Black History. That's why I do this. Now, what happened afterwards? In the aftermath, a lot of that's not clear. It is clear that Dick Rowland, the man who was accused of assaulting Sarah Page, was never convicted. The charges against him were dropped. And this was 1921, so you know he really didn't do anything. If he had done anything remotely they could have got him on, you better believe he'd have been in jail. No white participants were convicted for the massacre. Insurance claims by black property owners were largely denied. Many survivors rebuilt Greenwood, but the community never fully recovered its pre-1921 wealth and prominence. For decades, the massacre was omitted from history. And it's important to understand, again, these things used to happen regularly. Wilmington, 1898. Atlanta, 1906. Springfield, 1908. That's why we have the NAACP today, because the entire black community of Springfield, Illinois, was completely wiped off the map. Hundreds of people murdered. Everything burned to the ground. That is why, W.B. Du Bois and them started the NAACP. Chicago, Elaine, Arkansas, and Washington, D.C., 1919. Rosewood, 1923. Tulsa, 1921. And that's why I told you guys I think it was a few months ago, maybe it was a month ago, when I profiled Booker T. Washington for his birthday. I don't judge Booker T. Washington. Like a lot of modern historians and a lot of modern activists judge Booker T. Washington and call him an Uncle Tom and all this other stuff. Or they criticize things he may have did or said, or W.E.B. Du Bois, the guys. And I go, look, man, it's very easy to be a militant behind a laptop computer in 2026. It really is. We have no idea the level of racial terrorism these people lived under in the early 20th century. We really don't. We have no idea the circumstances their lives took place under on a daily basis. The idea that your entire city, community could be wiped out because you offend somebody white. Everybody you've ever known could be killed. Your house could be burned to the ground. They come in, they kill your wife, your children, lynch you, hang you from a tree, castrate you, set you on fire. That happened regularly in this country. We had pogroms all over this country. Racialized pogroms. And I don't blame anybody at that point for doing what they felt like they needed to do to make it stop. Booker T. Washington was doing the best he could. W.B. Du Bois were doing the best they could. He could to make it stop. And so, rest in peace to everybody who lost their lives in the Tulsa Race Massacre. One of the most important and tragic events in American history. You don't know who you are until you know where you've been. And this is who America is. This is who America's been. What's going on today should not confuse you if you know about this type of stuff. All right, folks, when we come back, we say goodbye to some more of our geniuses. Stay with us here on Straight Outta the Cannon with me, Scott Cannon, WLTH 1370 AM. And that's 92.7 in the FM dial. We'll be right back after these.